Carol Howell, and I'm the president of the Lincoln County Historical Association. And if you're not a member, I'll tell you how to become one after this. At LCHA, our mission is to, and it's truly a passion, is to collect, preserve, and share Lincoln County history. So we're obviously excited this morning. You can tell I'm really excited to host Beth Yarbrough and Ashley Oliphant, and they are two native Lincolntonians who share our passion for history. Beth is a successful author, artist, and photographer whose depictions of historic homes and structures across the South are featured on her website, Southern Voice, and in her collection of calendars and fine art prints. Additionally, her licensed artwork in the home decor industry is entering its 4th decade of success, reaching consumers worldwide through retailers such as Target, Lowe's, Home Depot, Hobby Lobby, you know the ones, and many, many more. From her home base in North Carolina, Beth travels the back roads of the South in search of great architecture and slices of Southern culture that delight thousands of followers on her Facebook and Instagram pages. Now, Dr. Ashley Oliphant, in the blue, is an associate professor of English at Pfeiffer University. Her doctoral dissertation was titled Hemingway's Mixed Drinks, an examination of the varied representation, this is a mouthful, of alcohol across the author's canon. Another book, Shark Tooth Hunting on the Carolina Coast, has sold more than 10,000 copies. It's published by Pineapple Press, and it is the only color guide to fossil shark teeth found in the Carolinas. I probably found 2 little ones in my life. The next book, Hemingway and Bimini, The Birth of Sport Fishing at the End of the World, was published by Pineapple Press in 2017. It follows Hemingway's 1930s fishing adventures in Bimini, which is the westernmost Bahamian island, and it talks about his significant contribution to the founding of the International Game Fish Association. Now, her 4th book, a novel titled In Search of Jimmy Buffett, a Key West Revival, was released in April 2018 by Warren Publishing. Do you see a pattern? Ashley's addicted to seawater and salt and sun. So could pirates be far behind? Like you all, Beth and Ashley have heard the stories about John Laffite and his possible connection to Lorenzo Ferrer of Lincoln County. But a conversation during a long car trip to New Orleans, I think it takes, what, 10 hours? Got them asking, what if? So, what if? What if? Today, Beth and Ashley are here to present what they found on their search to discover the true identity of John Laffite. Their new co-authored book, John Laffite Revealed, Unraveling One of America's Longest-Running Mysteries, will be released by the University of Louisiana Press on March 15th, but they have been granted the opportunity to offer Lincoln County residents an early sneak peek. We think you'll be thrilled by the buried treasures that they have uncovered and are about to reveal. Please help me welcome Beth Yarbrough and Ashley Oliphant.
Thank you, Carol. Hello.
Hey.
Y'all ready for this? All right, I'm going to open it up. We are here today to talk about the man in this picture, known to the world as Jean Laffite. Only that isn't a picture of him, and Jean Laffite likely wasn't his real name. Historians have determined that the man known as Laffite went by many aliases during his lifetime. Among those are Captain Hilaire, Mortimer Wilson, David Campbell, John Thomas, Wesley Clinton McOr, and even the number 13. Additionally, during the course of writing this book, we found 2 more aliases to add to the list. And while Laffite was his most famous alias, it was not his longest running.
Sometime after the year 1813, however, he was using it when he etched his name in the scabbard of this sword. The factory markings on the sword itself prove that it was manufactured specifically for the War of 1812 by the top American sword maker of the early 1800s, a man named Nathan Starr. Additionally, the iron scabbard proves that this particular model was made no earlier than 1812 and no later than 1813, because the earlier production run produced scabbards that were made of leather. It is commonly referred to as a contract cavalry saber, but to Jean Laffite during those years, it was nothing more than a small piece of his inventory, all of which was stolen property. At one point during the height of his reign as a privateer, Laffite's warehouses in Louisiana's Barataria Bay held merchandise estimated in the millions by today's standards, making him one of the wealthiest men in America. A significant part of Laffite's inventory consisted of a huge cache of stolen and smuggled weapons, rifles, muskets, cannons, and swords. As it turns out, many of those weapons ended up being put to good use a couple of years later in the Battle of New Orleans, a conflict that more than a few scholars say was greatly facilitated, if not won, due to the last-minute assistance of Jean Laffite and his crew of miscreants and this very inventory. The expert in antique metals who examined this sword and scabbard under a specialized microscope notes that the name inscribed on the scabbard was accomplished by an amateur with some sort of a sharp-pointed metal object. Put another way, this was not some sort of official presentation piece that was inscribed by a professional. Furthermore, the expert dated the inscription as being close in age to the sword itself. In other words, this is not an old piece with a much newer inscription. At some point after the inscription was made, the scabbard was coated with something likely intended to protect it, like a varnish or an oil or other substance. And the expert noted that this coating actually filled in and partially obscured part of the inscription. He also noted that the coating itself was very, very, very old. Even so, under microscopic examination, enough of the letters can be seen to determine the inscription, J.N. Laffite. Even the naked eye, with the help of a black light, can see what it says.
We do know that Jean Laffite never ever signed his full name, as in J-E-A-N, Laffite. Every historical document that has ever been uncovered in connection with Laffite bears this out, each one displaying the abbreviated version, J.N. Laffite. This, however, is a fact known only to Laffite scholars and others who have taken the time to dig into what few artifacts are known about the man. We drove to New Orleans and then Austin, Texas to observe some official Laffite signatures. This fact was certainly not known to the members of the Masonic Lodge here in Lincolnton, North Carolina, which is where this sword has been hiding in plain sight for nearly 170 years. In fact, they didn't even know the scabbard had an inscription because no one had ever taken it down off the wall to have a look until an afternoon in June of 2019 during the course of research for this book. Back in 1852, when Lodge 137 was formed, there would have been a need for a weapon that could serve as the Tyler's sword, an object that is commonly placed over the door of every Masonic lodge in existence. And based on everything that we now know as put forth in our book, we believe this sword was donated to the Lincolnton Lodge by one of the founding members. The Masons knew him as Brother Lorenzo Ferrer, but prior to that, the world knew him as the pirate Jean Laffite. The theory you're about to hear today is not based on hearsay or unreliable old newspaper accounts, but rather on primary archival documents and artifacts found in 7 states, from as far west as Austin, Texas, to as far north as Princeton, New Jersey. To understand how this story happened, we need to start at the beginning. One cannot Google Jean Laffite and get the story that we discovered. Ask us how we know that. The only way to piece it together is to read the entire body of published work on Laffite, find the common touch points that are verified by documents, and then see what they collectively have to say. We spent 2 years doing that, and here's what we know.
He was born sometime between 1778 and 1782. He was probably born in France, but there is no proof of his birth, and there is no proof that he had any siblings. There's no proof linking anybody born with the name Jean Laffite to the man who became the pirate. Therefore, the name Jean Laffite could have been an alias adopted in adulthood, and that's kind of what we believe is the case in this instance. He arrived on the island of Saint Domingue, which is present-day Haiti, sometime in the early 1800s. He established a charter business for residents who were fleeing civil unrest there due to slave uprisings. By 1805, he was in New Orleans. We know that because there was a written document that is still there that bears his signature, indicating that he was on Grand Terre during that time frame at the mouth of the Mississippi River. During these years, Laffite had extensive knowledge of the Freemasons and ties with them, though he was not a documented member of any lodge in America. We looked everywhere, and he's not on the books anywhere. We do know that almost from the beginning, he capitalized on the laws that prohibited the importation of slaves, setting up a slave smuggling operation in the bayous of Barataria, which is just outside of New Orleans. In concert with a man who called himself Pierre Laffite, some people say he was Jean's brother, but there's no proof of that, the two of them became fabulously wealthy by seizing slaves and valuables, using their own fleet of more than 100 ships and hundreds more of their own pirate employees, up to around 1,000 men at one time at the peak. They established one of the most successful black market operations America has ever seen, and they did it in a swamp. They also ran a blacksmith shop as a front organization in New Orleans, and that building still stands today as a delightful bar, and it has the distinction of being the oldest continuously running bar in America. And so if you're ever there, you need to go. And so local officials did not like what they had established, what the Laffites had established, and were from the beginning trying to shut them down. But somehow the Laffites always either escaped or eluded capture in some way. And then came the Battle of New Orleans.
With the assistance of close friend Arsène Le Carrière Latour and their lawyer, Edward Livingston, who knew pirates had lawyers, both of whom were close aides and confidants of General Andrew Jackson, the Laffites succeeded in winning Jackson's favor and gave critical assistance in the battle by providing flints, weapons, manpower, and valuable information about the waterways surrounding New Orleans. Despite the help they gave Jackson in the ultimate triumphant defeat of the British in this battle, and though Jackson later granted them a full pardon, the men were eventually run out of town and their empire seized and dismantled. For a brief couple of years, they tried to regroup in Galveston, Texas. While there, Jean Laffite built a very famous house, referred to in the French as Maison Rouge, because Laffite painted the house a distinctive bright red. During the Galveston years, Jean was in residence more than Pierre. There's good evidence to suggest that Pierre was in and out of ports as far away as Charleston, South Carolina during this time. By 1820, however, the Laffite luck in Galveston had run its course, and they were once again forced to take leave, which they did. By all accounts, they burned the whole encampment on their way out the door, leaving nothing behind. Spotty reports placed Jean and Pierre Laffite on the run in the Caribbean over the next couple of years, including several documented arrests of Jean in Cuba in 1822, during which time there are also documents proving that Jean was an authorized privateer for Colombia. In 1821, Pierre's death was recorded as having occurred in the Yucatan. On April 20th, 1823, a newspaper in Colombia reported that Jean Laffite had died in a gun battle with another ship he was trying to overtake. This report was paired with numerous other reports of Laffite's death over a span of several years in the 1820s, all of them purporting to be the truth. We, along with many other scholars, have never been satisfied with these accounts for a multiplicity of reasons that we outline in the book. It is a known fact that a man can only die one time, and with multiple Jean Laffite death theories floating around, that fact alone made all but one of those theories a lie. And given that, it was not outside the realm of possibility that they were all lies. We would have been remiss not to have explored that notion. We decided that there was a more than decent chance that Jean Laffite did not die in the 1820s at all.
Undergirding our position on this, first and foremost, is the fact that we found a never before discovered undigitized document in the Princeton University Library. We drove to New Jersey, dated May 23rd, 1829. This date was a full 6 years after Jean Laffite was supposed to be dead. The document was a letter written from Laffite's old friend Arsène Latour, now living a very influential existence in Cuba, and was addressed to Edward Livingston, Laffite's former lawyer, now also living a very illustrious life in Washington, D.C., as Andrew Jackson's soon-to-be ambassador to France. The letter states that Maison Rouge, which was Laffite's new code name, we discovered, was alive and well in Cuba with Latour. It also corresponds with another letter between the two men dated a month earlier in April 1829. Both letters refer in code to Laffite as Maison Rouge, which you'll remember is the name of that red house. The first letter indicates that Maison Rouge needs Livingston's help recovering some funds that they have spirited away for him in France earlier. The long story, however, is this. Jean Laffite was not dead, and those letters prove that he wasn't. Instead, he was hiding in Cuba with the help of very well-connected friends like Arsène Latour. At that point in time, he had to hide. Without Pierre as his partner, their business model was not going to function in the same way that it had before. Seafaring pirates were becoming a thing of the past as the Gulf waters were being better patrolled and ports were being more closely monitored for stolen goods coming in and out. Jean Laffite as well had made a lot of enemies, and many governments would have loved to have brought him to trial for his crimes. So how does an old pirate on the lam chart a new course? He reinvents himself yet again, and for the umpteenth time in his life, assumes yet another alias. Then, armed with a new name, he comes home through the back door. Our book lays a solid foundation for Laffite's intimate knowledge of the Mississippi River and all of the various tributaries, bayous, and backwater swamps that are at the mouth of that river. For instance, in the year 1815, Laffite and good old Latour, his buddy, actually were paid by the government of Spain to explore the Mississippi River and both shorelines all the way up into Arkansas. History also records that Laffite and Latour both used aliases during this expedition. Laffite went by Captain Hilaire, and Latour went by the name of John Williams. Imagine that, Jean Laffite used an alias. One of Laffite's favorite end runs around the ports in New Orleans had always been Bayou Lafourche, which is a backwater tributary that gives access upriver to Baton Rouge and points beyond. You can come straight off the Gulf up into the Mississippi without ever having to go anywhere near a port that would have an authority. And why come home sometime between 1829 and 1830? We can answer that in 2 words: slaves and cotton. And with the reminder that Jean Laffite, if nothing else, had a nose for that kind of opportunity and knew how to convert it into gold. History fully records what is now known as the Mississippi cotton boom of the 1830s, details of which can also be found in our book.
And that is precisely how we believe the man now known as Lorenzo Ferrer appears out of thin air in Copiah County, Mississippi on an 1830 census document. We don't use the term thin air unadvisedly either. Prior to this 1830 document, we could locate no one named Lorenzo Ferrer anywhere else on the face of the earth in any way, shape, or form, and we did try. From 1830 forward to 1836, however, we have him in Mississippi in abundant detail. During those years, using his new alias of Lorenzo Ferrer, documents indicate that Jean Laffite was once again a slave trader and now a land speculator, the result of which turned into another small fortune. And as a fun sidebar, he also got married. Nancy Alford, aged 17, to Ferrer's age 54, was the daughter of a wealthy man named Jesse Alford, who likely had done business with Ferrer. The undigitized documents that provided that proof are housed in the dusty basement of the courthouse in Raymond, Mississippi. The marriage did not last. In fact, it dissolved within 2 years with no divorce, no annulment, and no death. No children resulted from the union either.
On another note, however, there is one relationship from this period in Mississippi that did last. Very early in the Mississippi record of Ferrer, by the year 1831 in fact, we have documented proof that a slave girl named Louisa, owned by Ferrer, came into the picture. In a document dated December 27, 1831, held in an archival library in Nacogdoches, Texas, we learned that Ferrer loaned Louisa out to a man named George Brewer for an extended period of time, unfortunately for the likely process of slave procreation. Those of you from Lincoln County are going to recognize the name Louisa as the woman buried beside Ferrer in St. Luke's Episcopal Church Cemetery just down the street from here. We are 100% sure this is the same Louisa because her age at her death in Lincolnton comports with her age given in this Mississippi document, so it was the same woman. Because of this document, we know without a shadow of a doubt that the Lorenzo Ferrer in Mississippi is the same Lorenzo Ferrer who came to Lincolnton.
And by the way, we dedicated our book to Louisa Ferrer, and you will see that on the very first page. Following the dissolution of his marriage to Nancy, Ferrer was on the move. He landed 1 county north in Madison County, Mississippi, where documents indicate he resumed his trading business. And in another fun twist, there were some other new residents of Madison County, Mississippi at the exact same time, having arrived only a few years earlier, according to our documents. They are also shown as having done business out of the same Mount Salus land office that Ferrer is documented to have used. Given the fact that Madison County and the county seat of Canton were relatively small communities, there's little doubt that the paths of these men crossed with that of Lorenzo Ferrer, especially since the documents of the day indicate they were all engaged in the same practices of land speculation. These men, 3 brothers actually, all hailed from Lincolnton, North Carolina. One of them would later go on to become the first governor of Texas. Their names were James Pinckney Henderson, Lawson Franklin Henderson, and George William Henderson. all part of the very large Henderson clan who were born and raised at Woodside Plantation, a beautiful old federal home that still stands today on Highway 182 just outside of town. Given the obvious presence of not one, not two, but three prominent men from Lincolnton, North Carolina, living in the same small neck of the woods in Mississippi at the exact same time as Lorenzo Ferrer, the clear conclusion is that Ferrer did not choose Lincoln County as his next destination by throwing a dart at a map. He came to Lincolnton because of the Hendersons. By the year 1836, handwriting on the wall indicated that the Mississippi cotton boom was getting ready to go bust. With that realization, where was Lorenzo Ferrer to go now? The answer came in the form of Hedrick's tax roll for the year 1839. It shows Lorenzo Ferrer for the very first time as a resident of Lincoln County, North Carolina. And not only that, he apparently arrived in town with Louisa by his side and enough money to sustain him for the rest of his life, not to mention a newfound set of friends named Henderson, many of whom still lived here and would remain connected to Ferrer until the day he died. We should note here that before the 1830 census in Mississippi, there was no Lorenzo Ferrer in any document we could find in America. And once the Madison County, Mississippi records for Lorenzo Ferrer dried up, he was gone from Mississippi. The only other Lorenzo Ferrer in America was then found in Lincolnton, North Carolina. This was the same man. We also believe the alias Lorenzo Ferrer was chosen for a few reasons. The first was a nod and a wink from a seafaring man to Lorenzo Ferrer Maldonado, the 14th century explorer who successfully navigated the Northwest Passage. Ferrer is also an occupational surname for a blacksmith. You will remember that Laffite and Pierre ran a blacksmith shop as a front for their illegal smuggling business in New Orleans.
From 1839 forward, the document record of Ferrer in Lincoln County is abundant, save for one detail that has remained largely hidden until now, his involvement with the local Freemasons of Lincoln Lodge 137. That one fact ended up resulting in new revelations that turned into several chapters in the book. With the help of Jason Harp, who was the director of the Lincoln County Historical Association at the time, we were made aware that Lorenzo Ferrer was a founding member of that lodge. We were given access to the original of Ferrer's petition to join the lodge, and we will note now in front of you and everybody else that he lied on his petition in order to disguise who he really was. And we have documented the peculiarities of this document in the book. Furthermore, Lorenzo Ferrer was raised and vouched for by lodge members of the Henderson family, which is continuing proof that they were the reason that he came here in the first place. As a result of him joining the lodge, which met in those days in the upper floor of Pleasant Retreat Academy, still standing on Pine Street a few blocks from here, there are several chapters in the book that cover local scandals and other little-known details of Ferrer's time in Lincolnton, including one case partially involving a Henderson that ended up in the hands of the North Carolina Supreme Court, and that case is outlined in the book. The resulting financial scandal in Lincolnton was absolutely seismic, with all kinds of prominent families getting tangled up into what was a lot of money changing hands. It was a great big mess. Read the chapter. We owe a large debt of gratitude to the brothers of Lincoln Lodge 137, including Brent Turner, who is here with us today, because they allowed us inside their lodge, and they don't take kindly to strangers coming in to ask to see their things, but they were nice to us and helping us to piece this story together. Those details, paired with numerous other documents that we were able to find in places like the Lincoln County Register of Deeds and elsewhere, revealed a story of Ferrer in this town that became much more than cryptic tales of chests of gold and pirate murders, that we're going to talk about those here in just a second.
And while news stories evolved during the later life of Lorenzo Ferrer, there remained remnants of his past life as Jean Laffite, one of which was discovered after his death. What first appeared to be an original poem, but was later confirmed to be a ballad, was found in Ferrer's house after he died. Handwritten, It was a vivid and passionate account of the Battle of Pensacola, a precursor to the Battle of New Orleans. What makes the work noteworthy is the obvious personal admiration for, if not hero worship of, Andrew Jackson, a man who was near idolized by Jean Laffite. Apparently written in real time, sometime around the time of the War of 1812, it appears never to have been meant for public consumption, but rather would have been used as a ballad commemorating an important event and meant to be sung around a campfire, as amateur ballads of those days often were. Doctoral experts in 19th century poetry who we consulted could not find this work in any of their databases of published works. Their conclusion was that it was an original, unpublished ballad. It is in Ferrer's handwriting, just as his will is, and the original copy is right here on the front table.
It is in the Lincoln County Historical Association's collection. 2 years before he died, Ferrer wrote a will. For many years it was undiscovered and thought not to exist because searchers were looking in Lincoln County records. It was actually probated in Gaston County. That's the reason why for a couple of years nobody could find it. Until now, it has never been fully analyzed or understood, mainly because the local historians who read it did not know the full extent of Ferrer's identity. They didn't know how much more was below the surface. For starters, and now that we know the whole story, we sought and received the help of local historian Ann Delliger, whose knowledge of those mentioned in the will as inheritors was a tremendous advantage to our research. She is a tremendous advantage to this county. Let's put that one out on the table there. One of those inheritors, co-executor Wallace Reinhardt, ended up with Ferrer's main residence and all that it contained. Reinhardt was always referred to as Ferrer's closest friend, and the fact that he received the largest portion of Ferrer's estate attests to this fact. We would also note that as far as Ferrer is concerned, Wallace Reinhardt, who later became Lincoln County clerk, often receives undeserved criticism for sharing what he believed to be the truth about his friend. As the facts have emerged now, however, Reinhardt's account falls very much in line with what we know to be true. Wallace Reinhardt was right. Every point of the will is detailed in a chapter in our book, but the most interesting and confounding aspect of this document appears at the very end in a passage that has absolutely no bearing at all on the rest of the document.
On page 214 of our book, we go into detail about that passage, which we will read here. Perhaps it is not improper in me here to mention, in case of some mistake in taking one person for another on account of the same name, no commas yet, no periods, on account of the same name, comma, that is, comma, I had a cousin of the same name, age, and profession of myself. What profession was that, by the way? He never worked a day while he lived here. And he returned to France and he died. This is the first, oh wait, I skipped, I'm sorry. First, name, age, and profession of myself. He resided at the south and southwest. He contracted the consumption and he returned to France and he died. This is the first day of May, Anno Domini, 1873. I here affix my name and seal, Lorenzo Ferrer. When we first read this, even before we realized we would find Ferrer in Mississippi, we knew something did not square with the rest of the document. From beginning to end, in the main body of the will, the text flowed smoothly and contained words and phrases that were almost eloquent. By contrast, the passage that I just read to you does not flow, and in fact, it contains enough grammatical missteps that it almost points to another writer entirely. Beyond that, however, the subject of the passage made no sense to us at all. If in fact this cousin was dead, why even mention him? Especially since there was no discernible connection to Ferrer's estate or any living relative. The mention of the Southwest also puzzled us for many months. Once we made the Mississippi Ferrer connection, however, we realized exactly what that line was referencing. In the early 1800s, the area of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas was referenced as the Southwest, because that is as far south and west as developed American land stretched. As our research progressed and the more we learned, this passage made more and more sense. Before we take questions, we need to mention a couple of very famous stories about Lorenzo Ferrer that have contributed to the pirate myth for years. We have three. Now, how do you want to do this? Do you want to bounce? You tell one, I'll tell one?
I'll take the chest.
These are anecdotes, so we're
Yes.
going to be loose with how we tell them.
I'll do the first one.
Do the first one.
So the story of the chests of gold in the courthouse. So there, and I see some head shaking. You guys know what I'm talking about. When the Yankees were threatening, and they actually did come through Lincolnton, there was a little bit of advance notice in town. Ferrer, as the story goes, was concerned that they would find his valuables and his money and steal it. And so he enlisted the help of several local men and a mule team with a wagon to take what he had, which was in large chests, into the basement of the courthouse to be put into the vault to be protected. And the story goes that after, and Wallace Reinhardt was one of the men who went with him, and the story goes that after they got it there, Reinhardt's pay for having assisted that day was Ferrer opening up one of the chests, which turned out to be full of gold and jewels, and allowed him to take a little scoop off the top as his pay. So that is one of the stories that circulates around Lincolnton, and you'll see it in lots of different newspaper articles. Gladys Childs is one of the writers who did a lot of reporting in the middle of the last century about Ferrer in Lincolnton.
The next story that is often repeated is about the murder at Woodside. Many of you are familiar with Woodside, which is just up Highway 182. It's the house that has the big white stucco shoe, known as the shoe house, out in the yard. Ferrer reportedly was house sitting in that house in the late 1850s. And the story goes that in the middle of the night or sometime while Ferrer was there alone, he was surprised by an intruder, and an altercation ensued, and Ferrer ended up reportedly murdering this intruder. And in order to disguise what had happened, he reportedly chopped him up into little pieces and burned him in the upstairs fireplace of his house. We looked long and hard to try and find the original version of that story, or to determine where it started, where it came from. We even went back into the sheriff's records of the day, which, by the way, don't exist, and that's how we found that out. But we tried to see if there was actually a report from that day that recounted such a thing happening, and never did find it. You'll see in the book that this is also a little bit of a muddy issue, and we are 50-50 really of whether or not that's a true story or whether or not that's a story that people later decided sounded really good and just thought, let's tell that one while we're telling tales. So we do want to put that disclaimer out there. But there is another Woodside in Caswell County, North Carolina, that happened to be the family home of the wife of Stephen Dodson Ramseur. And there is a murder at Woodside story that resides in Caswell County as well. And because the Ramseur and Dodson families intermarried on more than one occasion and traveled back and forth extensively between both places, we really don't know if this story started in Caswell County and then made its way down here to Lincolnton's Woodside, or if the reverse is the case, that it migrated up to Caswell County and attached itself to that house. We firmly believe that the publication of this book is going to bring a lot of new information out of the woodwork, and we welcome that, no matter where it lands or what it reveals. That's one of the really good things about research, is that you hope that it will open doors for more information. And the whole matter of Woodside, and which Woodside is involved is one of those things that we hope to find out.
And there's an interesting parallel story that relates to the Caswell County, Milton.
Yes, there is.
It is said that a man mysteriously, named Lorenzo Ferrer, mysteriously appeared up there and put a whole bunch of money in the bank one day. We have attempted to track down their bank records. They were unfortunately destroyed in a fire, so I'm not sure that we're ever going to know that answer, but they have a story, and they're all trying to figure out who Lorenzo Ferrer is, and we're like, ooh, we know. But that story does exist, and we're going to continue to pursue it. Now, the last story, before we conclude, relates to Louisa and Bettinius. There's some speculation in town that Bettinius may have been Lorenzo Ferrer's son that he had with Louisa. And so the only record, and we based all of our research on records only, the only record that exists of him in town is at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in their vestry records. He is listed as Bettinius Ferrer. So that's the only document in town that will actually prove that he was here. The stories that circulate reference Ferrer becoming angry with the young man at some point over some undisclosed thing and burning his face in a fire because he was so angry. And some have sort of added on to the story that maybe he wanted him disfigured because he looked too much like his father and he didn't want that. But there is absolutely no proof of any of that other than there was a Bettinius Ferrer. He did live in the household and he did attend services at St. Luke's with Louisa and Ferrer. And similarly, the relationship between Louisa and Ferrer is also very much up for debate. She was a slave. She was purchased. She was loaned out for the purposes of procreation against her will. And so the question of whether there was a romantic relationship between the two, there's, I think, probably no way to ever know. But we do know that Louisa spoke from the grave to us and with that document in Texas that related to Mississippi to say, hey, this is the guy. You've got him. It's the same
She ratted him out, so to speak,
Yeah.
200 years after the fact.
And that makes us happy. So the
Very
tombstone that he erected for her is a lovely tribute. But that doesn't necessarily say that he treated her in a lovely way. So we don't know, and not knowing that and thinking about what her life might have been like is sad. And there were a lot of really sad parts of our research. Yeah. So to conclude, we want to close with similarities between Ferrer and Laffite that we noticed through all of the strains of this research that we did. Once all of the astonishing discoveries that we made from our 2 years of research were sort of spread out on the table and looked at all together, we realized how many of those commonalities existed, and here they are. They were both born within 2 or 3 years of each other. The native tongue of both men was French. They were both a bit deficient in English spelling, which has allowed us to make some connections between documents and know who wrote what, though they were relatively fluent in English composition. They were both Freemasons. They were both described as being very tall men, very well dressed, handsome with a dark complexion. Descriptions of both say that they were outstanding conversationalists. They both had very commanding personalities. They both had a fondness for mixed-race women and kept them as mistresses. So everywhere Laffite was, he had a beautiful mixed-race woman with him. The same can be said for Ferrer for his entire life. They were both slave traders. They were both land buyers. They were both very socially astute. They liked to surround themselves with wealthy, well-placed individuals who could assist them in a variety of ways. They were both ferocious and stubborn when it came to their money, and if anything ever happened to their money, they would fight you to get their money back. Each man loved an audience. They both always had money wherever they were. They both idolized Andrew Jackson. They were both very clever and secretive. Both of them would push their claims against other people to higher courts. We have evidence of that with Laffite and Ferrer. When things don't go his way, he pushes it up to the courts and goes as high as he has to go. They were both documented to have had, oddly enough, a penchant for beaver skin or otter skin caps, which is a very specific detail. But we have...
That is attributed to both men.
Absolutely. So we have evidence that Jean Laffite loved both otter skin and beaver skin caps, and there is an account of Lorenzo Ferrer wearing one in Lincolnton. And so that connection kind of caught our eye. And last, but certainly not least, they both had very similar handwriting. And you'll be able to see some comparisons in the book where we've made those distinctions. Even in his last days on Earth, Lorenzo Ferrer was trying to hide the truth. He did not want anybody doubling back to Mississippi and discovering whatever traces of him were left there. He did not want that past to be discovered. And now we know why. In that past life, the man who died as Lorenzo Ferrer in Lincolnton, North Carolina, was actually the pirate Jean Laffite. So now, we will take questions. I have a feeling that you might have a couple. Take it away.
Where did all the money end up? I mean, supposedly they found money in Texas or New Orleans when Katrina hit. Wasn't there some gold or something that was associated it with him? They found a bunch
There's been a lot of money.
Down.
Yeah, there's been a lot of money found through the years.
Yeah.
There have also been a lot of accounts of places where money is probably buried still, and we have no proof of any of that. That is not to say it isn't out there.
Yeah.
What we're saying is we didn't find evidence of it, and truly did not ever hear a reliable or documented account of what happened to these chests of gold that were supposed to have been locked up 3 blocks up the street here.
God.
We do have a guess as far as the Lincoln County portion of that money, and it is a guess only. In his will, Ferrer left, as we told you, his main house and everything in that house, and he was specific to say that. He actually, let me back up, he had 2 houses in Lincolnton that were a couple of blocks apart. In his will, he left one of those houses to a woman named Katie Sullivan, and we're still not quite sure why he did. But the will reads, I leave my house and lot 25 to Katie Sullivan. Well, the other house and lot was on lot 18, and that was the house he lived in. That line in the will reads, I leave my house and my lot and everything in the house and everything on the lot to my friend Wallace Reinhardt. Now, Wallace Reinhardt was the same man who knew about the chests of gold and helped hide those 10 years earlier. What that means, or if that means anything, we don't know, because like we say, we've never heard any account of anything being discovered here. We don't know.
So were you able to talk to the Reinhardt? I mean, are they still in this area, the Reinhardts? Or
We did talk to a couple of Reinhardt descendants because we're still on the hunt for a couple of artifacts, including an inkwell that was supposed to be Ferrer's. There were several things that were found in his house. This document is one of them. And because Reinhardt was the executor, we believe that Reinhardt is the one who scooped this up and realized it was something special and saved it. And so we have been in discussion with some Reinhardt descendants to see what we can find out. So far the inkwell has not turned up, and so far we've not been able to make any headway in determining where the money had gone. Now, one thing that we do point out in the book is that because of the Freemason ties, and this is a long shot, but I think it has to be said, there is a chance that the operation that he set up in Barataria and then attempted to set up in Galveston as well may not have been solely his own enterprise. That may have been Freemason activity, and that money may have never really been all his. And so the various fortunes that were created could quite possibly have never been his to take alone. We do know that after New Orleans, the government took almost everything he had. They came into Barataria, seized everything that was in his warehouses. There were some secret warehouses they weren't able to find, and the Laffites did have a little bit of advance notice before they were raided, so some of it got moved. But the New Orleans government seized almost everything they had. So their fortune went away like that. They then moved to Galveston. And so we argue there wasn't a whole lot left after New Orleans to be buried. The book also questions, and if you just sort of apply some logic to it, pirates risk their lives to steal treasure. While they may have sort of temporarily buried treasure, we do not believe that it would have remained buried long term. And when you look at discoveries of buried treasure that happened, say sort of in the last 100 years, there aren't a whole lot of them. You will find gold and jewels in shipwrecks that went down, but as far as we just dug up a chest of gold on a beach somewhere, it just doesn't happen. And so we're not out digging at night thinking that there's something around, because we really think that that money got spirited away, likely right around the time of his death. If there was anything. Yes, sir.
In Texas, he had a house either in Galveston or Austin. The remnants are still there.
No, they're not. So, but you're partially correct.
I saw a picture, but.
Yes, sir.
That is not the house.
Okay.
It's the land that the house was on. So his Maison Rouge in Galveston was the red house that helped us uncode, decode his identity in those letters. That house was burned to the ground. So when he left Galveston, they burned it down. Everything was gone. Another family came on that same piece of property and built a house, and so the ruins that are there now are of that house that came afterward. Though Galveston kind of likes to play around and be like, "Oh, this is this is Maison Rouge." It's not. It's just the land where it was.
Well, the neighbor said it's haunted anyway, so.
Maybe
It probably is.
yes, very well, maybe.
There is some, do you have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's mostly Louisa. I saw the image of her stone. Did they ever figure out if her remains are on the land?
Yes.
Okay.
They did some ground penetrating radar a few years ago. Originally, it was thought that she was buried in the lower slave graveyard because her marker had been moved down there some years back. But when they did the GPR a few years ago, they saw that she was buried right beside him, which is what he had requested. So when they found that out, they moved her stone back up to be beside his.
And we think the movement, the reason it was moved was a landscaping issue. There had been, some talk around Lincoln that maybe because she was mixed race that she wouldn't be buried beside him. It's totally not true. She was buried beside him. From what we had pieced together, it was a landscaping issue. Their stones were very close together, and the people who were coming to tend the graves couldn't get their machinery around it. And so, but no, the church congregation, she was buried beside him.
Did he actually have a son by Louisa?
We aren't sure.
Yes.
We will say this, Vatinius was mentioned in his will. He actually left Vatinius $100. And he referred to him as his former slave, Vatinius Sextius Ferrer. Now, he left a lot of money in that will to a lot of different people, but he never referred to any one of them as his former slave, except for Vatinius. We don't know if he was Ferrer's son or not. And Vatinius basically disappeared after Ferrer died. There was a couple of obscure reports that had him back in Lincolnton several decades later, but the documentation on him is so thin that it's non-existent. There's one anecdote and there's the St. Luke's written record, and that's really all we have.
Other questions?
Yes, where were his homes? I know you're mentioning lot 25 and lot 18, but where was that?
Lot 18, there was a house that stood here for years right behind where the old jail was.
Yeah.
And people refer to that as the Pirate's House. Well, that house that people call the Pirate's House was built about 25 or 30 years after Lorenzo Ferrer died. So it could not have been. However, it stood on the piece of property where Ferrer's house did stand. And that was lot 18. If you look at the old former jail building, which is still there, it's the piece of property that runs right behind that from, what street is that? Water Street back down to Church Street.
That where that old White House was?
Yes. That's lot 18. Then lot 25, where Katie Sullivan was granted, that's down on the corner of Church Street and Grove Street. Yeah, that was lot 25, and we found those in old insurance maps of the day that gave those lot numbers. So.
Well, that's neat to know. We don't have an image of what those houses look like.
And there's no image of Ferrer. We've looked.
That's just terrible.
We've looked for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Probably intentional on his part.
Maybe.
Yes,
Can
sir.
you tell the story of Peter Stewart and I?
Ah.
Yeah. That's my favorite one, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tee it up, and then I'll let you finish it. Peter Stewart Nay may be a name that's well known to a lot of you guys. He was another mysterious Frenchman who was in Lincolnton and Lincoln County, in and around this area, for about a same 6-year period as Lorenzo Ferrer. Ferrer came here in 1839. Nay died in 1844, 43, somewhere mid-1840s. Nay's origin was France as well. He was a school teacher, very highly regarded tutor, who was served private families because in those days the public schools didn't have them. But Mr. Nay, from Sherrill, South Carolina, all the way up into this area, Rowan County, Catawba County, Iredell, Lincoln, traveled around various spots and served as a teacher. He was a very fiery personality, and from the first day he landed in America, in Charleston, South Carolina, fresh off the boat from France, French exiles who were living in Charleston immediately began pointing the finger and saying, "It's Marshal Ney, it's Marshal Ney." Marshal Michel Ney was one of Napoleon's right-hand men, one of his most trusted and famous and heroic commanders. And the story was that Michel Ney, to this day, the public account is that he was executed by firing squad in Paris. However, Peter Stewart Ney, once he came to America, and only when he was drunk, never when he was sober, but only when he was drunk, he would start telling the story of who he really was. And the story never varied across all the years he lived here. Across different counties, different towns, and different people who heard it, it was exactly the same. The story that he told was, my execution was faked, and I was spirited out of France with the help of the Freemasons. The Freemasons helped stage my execution. They gave me free passage to the United States. They got me as far as Charleston, South Carolina, and they helped protect me after I got here. Because he was so widely recognized and people were shouting his name in Charleston, he had to come further inland in order to keep his identity a secret, and that is how he ended up in this area. Wallace Reinhardt was taught as a very young man by Peter Stewart Ney. So when Ferrer arrived here in 1839, sometime in the early 1840s, it was determined that these two mysterious Frenchmen needed to meet each other. And so an arrangement was made for them to be introduced to each other on the square in Lincolnton. And I will let you pick it up from there.
Their interaction didn't go so well. So as soon as they were brought together, observers said they began screaming at each other in French. And nobody around them spoke French, so they didn't know what they were saying. But all accounts determined that they had to be pulled apart from each other because the observers were worried they were getting ready to get into a fist fight. And as they were being pulled away, Ferrer calmed down more quickly and kept his mouth shut and just sort of got out of the situation. Ney, however, began to scream in English so that everybody around could hear, that man is a traitor
And a renegade.
and a renegade, which is a word that is associated with pirates, and he should be hanged. And so they pulled them apart, and Ferrer, even though he was prompted many times by other people to say, dude, what happened here? Refused to say anything about the situation. And so he and Ferrer and Ney, who we believe really was Marshal Michel Ney, they had bad blood from the past. We can't pinpoint where that bad blood could have originated, though there are some stories that we pose in the book that are quite interesting, one of which involves a rescue plot to try to get Napoleon out of exile. And there were multiple plots that are pretty well documented of his followers who were very passionate, attempting to get him to freedom because they wanted him to regain the throne, whether that was in France or somewhere else, and to have a kingdom again. And so those stories exist, and one of those stories is a rescue plot that may have involved Jean Laffite, using one of his ships to go to an appointed time, to an appointed location at an appointed time, where an escaped Napoleon was going to be waiting, and Laffite was supposedly going to bring him back to America. Laffite arrived. All of Napoleon's chests, including his valuables, were there at the dock waiting, but Napoleon was not. The story, we can't vouch for its truthfulness or not, the story is that Laffite loaded up all the stuff and set sail without Napoleon. And so if it was true, if it was true, and we know from accounts of Ney
Yes.
that he was physically ill over the thought of Napoleon being in exile. If it is true, and word was really on the street that Laffite had screwed up the rescue and had stolen his money, that would be reason enough to scream at a man for being a traitor and a renegade who should be hanged on the street in Lincolnton. So there are all of these, and you'll see it throughout the book, there are all of these connections that we pose that are just, they're interesting and they need more exploration, which we plan to keep pushing.
And we also note that Ney's reference to someone being a traitor, Peter Stewart Ney had no special allegiance to the United States of America. He probably would have cared less if someone was a traitor to this country, but he was extremely passionate about anyone that he deemed to be a traitor to France. So when he was shouting in English and pointing at Ferrer and saying this man is a traitor, we're pretty sure he was not referring to the United States.
Any other questions? And we'll be glad to answer individual questions. We're going to move to the lobby here shortly, and we have some documents on display. The original, the only one that's an original is here. This is the ballad that was found in his home, and you can also come up and take a look at the sword. But as you go into the sun room there, you'll see another table full of documents that are actually copies of some of the documents that we've referenced here, so you can see those up close. And then we would be delighted to sign a book and to answer any other questions you have. But we're glad that you came. We hope you're as excited about this history as we are, and we can't wait to see what sort of the next step in all of this is. But it's
and please don't touch the sword.
yeah, please don't touch the sword.
Thank you.
Thank you.